I still remember the day the nightmare began, surrounded by blood, decay, and the aroma of fried shotgun shells. Yeah, let me tell you, this is what hell smells like! I am a Space Marine, one of Earth's toughest, hardened in combat, and trained for action. My unit and I were sent with boots on the ground to deal with a terrorist incident in front of the White House on a need-to-know basis to shoot anything that moves. Simple enough, as you can imagine. After a bit of ingenuity, some cooked grenades, and very little cover to work with, we managed to clear the combat zone of all hostiles within a matter of minutes. That's when the bird arrived with Kane inside, our commanding officer, stepping out of the hatch before it even landed, with cigar in hand, late to the party, long after it was hot, like he owned the place.
Damn! Looks like hell out here!
The bird departed immediately. One of those newfangled choppers, the ones without any blades. So, nothing to chop. No one cares what his rank is. We just like calling him Major Payne. And I seem to remember the other troops saluted him. I was busy surveying the area, running my hands along surfaces and pushing on them. Anything I could do to ignore him. Something didn't feel right. And that's when he started approaching me. Just as that oxygen thief started breathing down my neck for attention, I had found and opened a hatch hidden in the ground, uncovering a crowd of refugees tightly huddled a few feet underneath. Kane seemed to think I had found him his own personal stash of secret aliens, as he put it. I tried to reach out my hand to help pull them out, but he smacked it away, flippantly ordering me to gun down these people, convinced they were terrorists. I think they might have shared the same ethnic background as the hostiles, but I was taken aback. These were clearly civvies. I took another look, locking eyes with a mother clutching her child. Naturally, I refused the order.
Am I going to do everything in this unit?
That's when Kane pulled out his sidearm and disabled the safety.
It's real easy. Here, I'll show you. First, you pick your favorite toy. Then, you tell it where you want to go. And then, you just pull the trigger. See? Simple. Just like this.
Legend has it he never finished that sentence. Before I knew it, I had Kane on the ground with my fists painted in his blood. I let the refugees vacate behind me while I was giving Major Payne a major makeover. Moments later, the rest of the Space Marine unit finally cut in. It must have taken like 4 of them to pry me off the bloody pulp of a soup sandwich that lay before me, while others helped him to his feet. I knew I was catching flack from this football bat. I'd gladly do it again. Major Payne himself let me have it, screaming his head off that I'd be court-martialed, then receive a firing squad. However, that kind of scandal would only open up a massive Streisand effect, so he came up with a backup plan. He said he noted a lack of surprise one of Crash's own recruits would pull a stunt like this, that he'd whip me into shape just like the other guy. Next thing I knew, I was being carted off to the nearest spaceport, while Major Payne and his body cast were shipped to Pearl Harbor. Did so much as give me a moment to pack a bag. I had gotten the green weenie. They were transferring me to Mars, the butt end of space for the entire Union Aerospace Corporation. The UAC, being a multiplanetary conglomerate, has been stationed on every planet in the solar system for years, and they were putting me on the one with nothing but toxic waste facilities to mop up for the rest of my life. I regret nothing. As I boarded up the ramp to the docked ship, ready for takeoff, I heard rapid footsteps at my 6. I heard someone kick open the door. I didn't need to turn around to identify the only person in the solar system who would do something like that. I could hear some sort of rifleman and a shotgun guy trying to get her to stand down. It's almost funny they thought it could work.
What the?
Excuse me! Hey, Doom Guy!
Ma'am, you can't be here. You need clearance to— Whoa!
Then she practically threw them both into the walls on either side. You should have seen it. Wish I did. Her footsteps power walked up to the base of the ramp. I waited for her, right in the eye of the storm.
So this is how I find out? They're shipping you off the planet and you just go? You never call!
I just stood there in the mouth of the ship, covered in shadows.
I guess I had that coming. Have fun storming the castle. Good luck. Don't be a stranger. Well, at least not stranger than you already are.
Crash taught me everything I know about being a Space Marine, so I took one last look at the only friendly face I was ever going to see for the rest of my days before I boarded the ship and blasted off for Mars. This was gonna be hell. As I set foot onto New Hebeth, the city of Mars, I began to take in the strange, literally alien sights of bleeding-edge technology that covered the surrounding area. It was beautiful. I almost started to develop a sense of childlike wonderment before a rather cold welcomer appeared before me, before I even realized it. Welcome to hell. The most boring job on the Space Marine Corps. No action here for 50 million miles. Your days consist of sucking dust and watching restricted flicks in the rec room, so stop moping and start mopping. Now! Every day since then, it was the same routine. I'd be rudely awoken by that insipid alien mascot Adrian, followed by a shower, shave, and mopping all day, every day. Sometimes I'd even eat every now and then to spice things up. Yeah, 3 years of this. Some wonders managed to arise during that time. Though the UAC is stationed on every planet in the solar system, the Mars division has always been seen as something of a joke. A mere dumping ground for the disposal of toxic waste. However, they have been attempting to gain some legitimacy in the eyes of their peers with a newfound project in the form of terraforming Phobos and Deimos. At that point, they had modest success in agricultural development, and were expecting a new shipment of supplies and plant life soon. I could see all manner of incredible tech, including some rather large mechanical frames, mechas, and the like. I just hated the spider-like one with a minigun attached to its front. Ugh. In other developments, a rather large weapon had been constructed, and I overheard the lead developer say it's called the BFG 9000, a handheld weapon. He had to sacrifice a few benefits in order to have the privilege of officially naming it, but says that it was totally worth it. His colleagues started questioning what the acronym even stands for. Bioforce gun, big friendly giant, the designer wouldn't say, leaving it a mystery. One individual showed some new tech to one of our high-ranking officials. It allows the user to take physical objects, convert them into digital data, and download them into a hard drive. Then, when we need it back, we can just re-upload it back into physical reality. It was already being fitted with the new Space Marine body armor, and has been intended to allow us to carry numerous weapons at once, weightlessly. Though there's no telling what'll happen if you attempt to download a living thing. The official was quite impressed, and the scientist thankfully noted that it was actually my idea in the first place, pointing to me while I was mopping across the room. The official was just all like, "He spoke?" but just dismissed it. He came right up to me, asking me if I thought I was being coy by involving myself in developments like this, as if it would do me any favors in raising my rank back up after what I did to Kane 3 years back. Strangely, I had to mop up a lot of blood, and guts, and other body parts. I wasn't given any details, but was often forced to clean up the messes as quickly as possible. I did a lot of that. They wouldn't tell me where the body parts were coming from. I'm not stupid. However, that was my routine. Then came that fateful day, the day the supply ship was scheduled to arrive. I showed my id card to the security advisor, who welcomed me to the butt end of space, and I was sent off to the slipgate chamber on the Phobos tech base. I met with my old war buddy, Phobos. We both trained under Crash. Turns out he's even become a colonel now. The UAC's golden child, decked out in nanotech armor and fitted with the finest nanobots in his blood your tax dollars can buy. Caught him in a video chat with his wife and kid, saying how he'll be here on Mars to keep everyone safe, and he'll shoot any bad aliens that try to hurt anybody. Despite practically being opposites in the chain of command at this point, Phobos always treated me with reverence, and lamented how he wishes he still had his guts and free spirit, but can't deny the benefits he's gotten as being one of the highest-ranking space marines on Mars, and given the best equipment on the entire planet. I tried to have a little chat with my brother from another mother, but our little talk was cut short when I got ordered to mop up another messy spot. More human remains, and they were getting worse. They were always getting worse. No one would tell me what was causing these incidents. Doesn't take a top clearance scientist to figure it out. For the last 4 years, the military, UAC's biggest supplier, has used the remote facilities on Phobos and Deimos to conduct various secret projects, including research on interdimensional space travel. So far, they have been able to open gateways between Phobos and Deimos, throwing a few gadgets into one and watching them come out the other. Recently, however, the gateways have grown dangerously unstable. Military volunteers entering them have either disappeared or been stricken with a strange form of insanity, babbling vulgarities, bludgeoning anything that breathes, and finally suffering an untimely death of full-body explosion. Matching heads with torsos to send home to the folks became a full-time job. Anyway, that should tell you how cleanup went. It was one of my better days, so I dropped by the mess hall for lunch. I was soon joined by Phobos, followed by 4 other Space Marines, Lorelei Chen, John Petro Pietrovich, Dmitry Paramo, and T. Barrett. They're alright, and the 4 of them were glad to be getting transferred off Mars and back to Earth, as their ship would be arriving in the coming weeks. Even that security advisor, Buddy DeCote, showed up. You should have seen the looks on everyone else's faces when Phobos told them how some shenanigans they caused earned me the name Doom Guy. Those were some good times. I'm gonna miss those troublemakers. Anyway, the hour of destiny came at hand. A supply ship from Starstruck touched down and dropped off some agricultural cargo, seeds and crops and the like, for the terraforming project. Some Marines came by to cart it all off, but as soon as one of the boys picked up a crate of chainsaws, they spotted a tiny little stowaway in the form of a brown baby bunny, sitting in a flower box, munching on daisies. Probably the only speck of pure innocence left on this rock. They tried to catch the little rabbit, but she scuttled away down the hall, while one of the higher-ups demanded them to nail her to his desk or they would be getting demoted. I was down that hall. I overheard the whole thing. The little rabbit hopped my way and hid in the mop bucket, scared witless. Fortunately, those other Marines ran right past me and never saw her again. She peeked her little head out, and I handed her the flowery snack she dropped. I wasn't gonna let anything happen to her. Somehow I could relate. Neither of us wanted to be on this planet, but we were forced against our will and were being harshly punished undeservedly by people in power who wanted us dead. This little angel was gonna be my little secret, and I named her Daisy. We did everything together. We danced, we played, we ate. When T, John, Lorelei, and Dmitry departed for Earth, we saw them off. Someone might have helped her wave a little paw goodbye, and of course, I often let her lay under my hat or in my pocket in secret while I did my work. The mopping felt a little less macabre. I felt happy again. About a couple months later, Mars was finally holding their big conference presentation for the Slipgate project. They've been trying to perfect that portal technology connecting Phobos and Deimos. There's been a lot of issues, both mechanically and from a lot of scientists being spooked about it somehow, but development has been progressing nonetheless. Everyone was a little unsure about how well it was all going to work, but some were certain they'd worked all the bugs out. The Space Marines demanded that the scientists have the portal in working condition to show in the video call. Representatives of every planet in the solar system were attending this thing. There was no room left to screw it up. Once it started, interplanetary representatives and other top-level UAC executives began their meeting. Over on Phobos, they talked about their agricultural project, and soon moved on to preparing a demonstration of their new portal technology, the Slipgate project. One of the execs said it wasn't necessary, as they already had their terraforming project, and they wouldn't need to keep going overboard, as they're not the joke they were once seen as 3 years ago, and have since earned the respect of their peers around the solar system with their agricultural endeavors. However, another exec had heard a thing or two about this, and wanted to discuss the rumors he'd heard about it, as he had his doubts to its legitimacy. He discussed what he'd heard about with the aforementioned effects it's had on people testing it, and that matching heads with torsos to send back to Earth had become a full-time job. One of the Mars execs chimed in that these were merely exaggerated rumors, and that the truth is something much more wonderful. They called it Tatenga. That was their excuse. They insisted they discovered a new planet capable of sustaining human life in a distant galaxy. Supposedly, it was immeasurably larger than Earth, yet had similar gravity, along with an orbit akin to a moon, thus straight up giving it a light side and a dark side. That Mars exec prattled on and on about how the blood-curdling incidents they'd had were the result of glitches from earlier builds of the Slipgate that have since been patched out, and that everything is under control. He went on to say that they had hoped to return to it soon, once the tech was more stable, as safety is their highest priority. That was a lie. Everyone on Mars knows that around here, The thing about safety protocol is, it's expected to be there, but it's not really that important. That's when Dr. Eve Pandora came in, scientist extraordinaire, inventor of the Slipgate, and owner of the most ominous name I've ever heard in my life. She spoke in complete assurance that they hadn't had an incident in weeks, and that everything was working perfectly. The Mars exec was trying to find his words, but Pandora filled the room.
Sir, if it's all right with you, I think I can take it from here. As lead developer of the Slipgate, I have complete faith in my team. And to prove to you my conviction, I offer 6 of the greatest minds on Mars. We shall demonstrate what humanity is truly capable of. I stand before you on Phobos, but in mere seconds I will slip through the gate, and we shall meet you all on Deimos. Behold, a glimpse into the future of mankind.
She activated the portal, waved to the board, waved to the screens with her colleagues on Deimos, and then walked through the portal, along with her team. Everyone was cheering, but then the cheers slowly fizzled out. Everyone was waiting for them to come out the other end on Deimos. They should have been walking out instantly, but there was nothing there. Soon, everyone started to panic. They started checking and rechecking everything. The scientists' trackers weren't showing any kind of reading. No one had any idea what had happened to them. Some of the board members proclaimed this proved that Mars had been taking on too much, and that this project should have been shut down a long time ago. Suddenly, after a full minute of this, someone picked up a single reading again. No one on Phobos was getting any readings, but the scientists on Deimos were picking up faint readings of a single individual. One scientist was being faintly read through the portal, getting closer and closer. Everyone watching all over the solar system was on the edge of their seats. Finally, one lone scientist named Adam walked backwards through the portal, more than a bit shaken. To say he looked like he'd been through hell would have been an understatement. The other scientists called out to him, trying to get a grasp on the situation. Slowly, Adam turned around, not only with a grotesque face, but also with Eve's chewed up and severed arm already rotting in his teeth. Next thing anyone knew, he dropped the arm from his mouth and lunged at the Deimos scientists, screeching obscenities and bludgeoning them all to death. Finally, one of the Mars execs ordered them to cut the feed immediately, and they did, abandoning the conference call prematurely. This was seen all over the solar system. Some of the nearby space marines on Deimos were immediately ordered to capture Adam, so they hit him with a tranquilizer and lugged him over to Mars. Once Adam regained consciousness, he was of a somewhat sound mind, but very quiet, as he found himself locked inside a small room with a single bulletproof window, where high-ranking officials were watching him. One of them addressed him, asking to know what happened, what he saw, where his team went. Adam wouldn't show any sign of a response. After plenty of probing with no results, the officials started to walk off. Suddenly, Adam lurched toward the window, fracturing the bulletproof glass, and started acting frantic.
They are about to kill us all! They are bringing it with them! It is nearly here!
What is?
With that, his head was thrown back unnaturally far as he stumbled into the center of the room. His body seemed to char itself as bright red runes formed along him. His eyes and mouth began to glow, and he let out an inhuman shriek, wailing like a wraith as his flesh started to quickly glow brighter and brighter. The Marines hit the deck a split second before the time of Adam Prometheus expired. Just like the rest of them, he met his untimely death of a full-body explosion. But this time was even worse. Not a single speck of flesh remained, nor even the window. Every inch of the entire room was painted in Adam's blood, all but an intricate pentacle on the floor beneath the skeleton that was once Adam. Not drawn, but rather made out of the absence of blood. They had seen enough. With no rational explanation for these recurring incidents, as well as the loss of its creator, the Slipgate project was shut down immediately. Too little, too late. Once the scientists received the order, they immediately deactivated the slipgates, which, as chilling as it sounds, strangely made noises that almost sounded like screeches of protest before finally turning off. Spooky. Morale was at an all-time low. Everyone adored Dr. Eve. Some of the scientists were pretty glad they didn't end up being part of her team in the end. Meanwhile, the execs desperately needed a bloody mess cleaned up fast, and needed someone who definitely wouldn't talk. One of them knows a guy. A Doom guy. I was called in to do the dirty work, again. On my way over, I bumped into a couple Marines who were rolling some boxes out of the medical bay. One of those boxes fell over and started to spill some sort of jet black first aid kits. One Marine picked them up while the other moved the box back onto its carrier. Apparently these medkits were too unstable for medical purposes, and they were getting dumped into the containment area on Deimos. In their rush, I watched them leave one laying on top of one of the crates while they dragged everything to the nearest auto ship. I took one myself, bound for Phobos, and rode the monorail the rest of the way to the slipgate chamber. Soon I was brought into the room to mop up Adam, with Daisy tucked away inside my uniform, while the execs talked amongst themselves. I began mopping the blood off the floor, but something felt wrong. More than usual. I can't explain it. It was almost as if the blood on the floor was trying to climb me. Then, before I knew it, Adam, the skeleton, was staring me dead in the face. He lurched forward and grabbed hold of me, shaking in terror. What he said to me chilled my own bones. I looked to the Marines in the next room. They hadn't seen a thing. Next thing I knew, Adam's skeleton was back on the floor like nothing happened. He tried to warn us, but nothing in this world could have prepared us for what was next. Back at the slipgate chambers on Phobos and Deimos, the scientists started locking up and were just about to depart. Buddy DeCote was still stationed at the Phobos slipgate and just wanted the room emptied so he could leave. Suddenly, both slipgates reactivated on their own accord. The scientists were baffled. Everything was switched off. The power was even unplugged. The portals, physically, could not open. Yet there they stared into the impossible. All the computer systems started to malfunction in the most unexplainable ways, slowly growing more and more haywire as pentagrams, skulls, and sixes were displayed on anything that could be described as a screen, while strange voices began to chant from nowhere. On Phobos, one of the scientists thought he saw something moving inside the portal and walked over to check it out, desperately wanting to believe it was Eve or one of his colleagues. He walked closer and closer, gazed deeply into the anomaly, until finally something leapt out. Something bellowing with rage and tore him to shreds on the floor where he stood. Buddy bolted from his post as fast as he could and turned on the emergency intercom, screaming into the microphone.
"We require immediate military support! Something fragging evil is coming out of the gateways! Computer systems have gone berserk!"
Everyone on Mars, Phobos, and Deimos heard this. Everyone. I know at least one Marine was convinced it was a prank about getting attacked by space pirates, until more people in the Mars complex began to look and see something happening, pointing into space. Deimos started getting covered in some sort of energy originating from the point where its portal to Phobos was located. Once it became completely covered, Deimos just vanished. Completely. After a few more silent seconds processing what they had just witnessed, screaming ensued. No one on Mars could make any sort of contact with anyone on either moon. I couldn't tell you what happened to their fate. Everyone was in full panic mode. Space Marines, scientists, execs, everyone. At that point, I was just trying to mop near some ships while attempting to comfort Daisy, who was looking a bit frightened from all the loud noises. The only Space Marines in the Mars complex were sent to handle it, as the nearest Marines anywhere else were 50 million miles away, on Earth. We headed for the ships. I wasn't quite sure what was going on at the time, but I was ordered to head into one of the ships along with every last Space Marine on Mars. We were about to take off for the Phobos tech base and investigate the situation. Everyone geared up, grabbed some big guns, and boarded the ship. Meanwhile, I was still trying to keep Daisy hidden. I didn't have time to put her anywhere. I think someone might have seen her, but there were bigger things to worry about. The ship headed straight for Phobos and soon landed in a hangar on the tech base. Colonel Phobos led the Space Marines into the base. Some of them were even wearing that new green combat armor. However, I was forced to guard the perimeter with a sidearm jammed into my hands and ordered to stay put. Now that I think about it, they were probably still mad about old Major Payne. I was left behind while the other Space Marines took all the bigger, heavier weapons with them. The Marines began their trek through the moon's tech base. I could hear over my radio they weren't seeing anything, not even those things climbing on the ceiling above them. There came a point when they were about to head through a door. They seemed to hear something strange on the other side. I could tell one of the Space Marines didn't care what was behind that door, and insisted he was about to make it his... Yeah. They got ready to head inside and open the door. As I continued to secure the perimeter, my radio picked up sounds of combat, guns firing, men yelling orders, screams, bones cracking, and then finally, silence. This went on for several hours. I couldn't see anything, but I heard everything.
There's something coming through the gateway. Something evil. Something went wrong, so they sent in the troops. These things are not human. Repeat. But there was one man who was under orders to stay outside. Situation negative! Repeat! Situation negative! Get the out of there! Damn it! Can anyone respond? Boys, get the out of there!
I was still trying to process what I had just heard, but I was focusing on trying to calm down Daisy. All the screaming and combat were gone. Dead silence. Seems my buddies are dead after all. I just set Daisy down and shut off the radio. I couldn't bear it anymore. I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but it was right then and there that I headed for the dropship that I and the other Space Marines arrived in. I reactivated it, and as the engine let out a hum, I set coordinates for a destination, eyeing Mars, then Earth. I stepped out and looked around for Daisy, but I couldn't see her. I looked around for a few more seconds before I finally heard the nearby automatic door opening. I looked up to see her hopping out of the room. I felt a bit relieved, but concerned, and started walking over to pick her up. And to my horror, there lay a dark shadow forming around her. In a flash, something dropped from the ceiling and seized Daisy, squeezing her tight, impaling her with its claws, and proceeded to pry her flesh off with its jaws. It actually proceeded to eat her alive, and Daisy was screeching in agony. I never felt anything like it. Something was deeply, cosmically unsettling about this thing. It wasn't human. It was covered in spikes along its hide, and it felt hollow, as if it were the only being in the universe that had never been shaped by the hand of God. However, I didn't have time to dwell on this, as it soon stopped its gnawing and dropped Daisy right on the floor, forgetting about her completely as she bled out. I attempted to pull out my sidearm. I don't know why it was so hard. The creature turned, and its gaze stared deeply into my soul. With a fanged smirk, pounced on me, knocking me to the floor, causing me to drop the gun as it fumbled away, while this thing pinned me to the ground as its newfound prey. The monster proceeded to rip my shirt apart, tear it open, and plunge its hands into my chest, soon followed by them practically melting into my skin. It was trying to possess me like some kind of demon. You ever had an out-of-body experience before? That was me. That thing was pushing me outside of my own body. I desperately tried to reach for my pistol on the floor, but it was just out of reach, not helped by the fact that my soul grew further and further from my body every second. The demon kept holding my near carcass still, pinned to the floor, barely able to move. Its hands kept going deeper and deeper through my body, pushing my soul further and further out. I tried to reach for the gun with one arm and keep the creature at bay with the other, pushing as hard as I could to keep it from sinking any lower into my body and soul. It then proceeded to gnaw on my arm. I couldn't feel anything. I was about to detach from my own body. Finally, I made a desperate and dangerous move, focusing entirely on fitting my soul back into my arm while the rest of my soul started to float above my body. A few eternities later, I then managed to get the gun within my grasp, plunged the barrel into the Druzh's face, and pulled the trigger, blowing its brains out. As the unholy corpse fell beside me to the floor, its flesh, particularly the hands, finally detached from my skin. The moment I realized I had fallen back into my body, I immediately got up and scrambled over to Daisy, who at this point was covered in her own blood and dying on the floor. She whimpered helplessly, unable to move, gored open. Slowly and delicately, I tried to pick her up. She was just hyperventilating and gazing up at me. I cradled her in my hands, stroking her fur, taking on the impossible task of soothing someone who had just been torn in half. She couldn't do it anymore. Eventually, Daisy stopped breathing. I used my hand to close her eyes like a real trooper, stroking her fur one last time with my thumb. I just laid my forehead on her corpse and silently wept. Then something in me just snapped. Something was gone, but something was new. My fear died at the hand of my rage. There was still one suit of armor left, untouched, in the dropship. As I walked to take hold of it, I crushed the demon's head beneath my boot without even realizing it, and put on the armor. As I did, everything I had learned from Crash, everything the UAC tried to stamp out of me, came rushing back.
Hey, look at me! Look at me! They are rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear until it is done.
Once I had calibrated the suit's tech, I carefully placed Daisy into the front of my utility belt. I will never forget that wicked face of the one who took her from me. The only way out is through. I needed to escape through the base and warn Earth of the coming threat. Things weren't looking too good. I could never navigate off the tech base on my own. Plus, all the heavy weapons had been taken by the assault team, leaving me with only a pistol. If only I could get my hands around a plasma rifle, or even a shotgun, I could take a few down on my way out. Whatever killed my buddies deserved a couple of pellets in the forehead. Securing my helmet, I exited the landing pod. Hopefully I could find more substantial firepower somewhere within the station. As I walked through the main entrance of the base, I heard animal-like growls echoing throughout the distant corridors. They knew I was here. There is no turning back now. There were only two things I wanted to do. Rip and tear. I began the trek forward. I looked to my right, nothing of note. But to my left, I heard something. 4 shotgun guys, looking like they'd been possessed. Zombies with shotguns. Just what my therapist ordered. And I watched them sneer and jeer at me. In hindsight, I think they were expecting me to cower in fear. Instead, I came for their guts. They weren't expecting that. Time for some payback. I rushed the nearest one, shattered one of his arms with some brass knuckles, impaled the other with a hunting knife, proceeded to rip the shotgun out of his hands to the point I ended up prying his arms right off, shoved the shotgun right in his face, and now I had a shotgun. Ho, ho, ho. There was red and green everywhere, just like Christmas. I made light work of the others and proceeded down the hall. Tatenga room. They were really banking on this. Look where it got them. On the wrong side of my gun. Alarms were blaring. Wasn't a good sign. Worse, down the corridor, more possessed soldiers, with shotguns and rifles. My old buddies. Some kind of sick joke. A couple more of those demons were up above on a ledge, hurling fireballs of all things at me. I didn't have much time to react before something burst, and the room began to flood with a major nukage spill. That stuff will kill ya. Those little imps never stood a chance. Good thing, too, cause as soon as I passed through the next door, there were more of those things, conveniently making their way around a barrel of nuclear waste. When I shot it, the whole room lit up. It was instinct. I'd never felt more alive, and I'd probably never felt like paste before. First time for everything. An important-looking door to the monorail was waiting. Another imp on the other side of the door tried to get the drop on me, but I wasn't gonna fall for that again. I punched the ignition and let the monorail rip. I could see a little map showing my destination marked with an error message reading, Phobos Anomaly. Next stop, the Slipgate Chamber. Or, so I thought. Meanwhile, in hell, nearby where the recently deceased souls of the damned were falling into the afterlife, an imp plucked some weed and started using his fire sorcery to set it ablaze, then proceeded to eat it. Suddenly, another imp appeared and called him out on it.
Hey! That's the devil's lettuce! You'll get your own!
They then noticed something strange above them and looked up to see a flickering blue light among the damned souls moving further and further towards the edge of the perpetually falling cluster as it dropped, slowly. As I understand, it was a dark imp, the very same Druge that murdered Daisy, no less. She had died and gone to hell, and she was trying to use her flames to slow her descent. Finally, she free fell and dropped right on top of the two imps. Seems she was still trying to process our encounter.
I just died. Somebody killed me. No one has ever done that to me before.
Soon, more demons proceeded to drop from the sky alongside the human souls. The demons on the ground were getting concerned. They looked up above as dread began to set in.
What the hell is going on up there?
Meanwhile, back on Phobos, I was still riding the monorail bound for the Phobos Anomaly. I had just passed the nuclear plant and didn't think anything of it till something blew up the rail up ahead. The monorail was going to crash! There was no time. I leapt out of the emergency hatch and sprinted across the roof, trying to get close enough to jump off to the stop for the nuclear plant before I ran out of train cars, and there was a nuclear waste flood below me to boot. Swell. At the last second, I managed to leap off and barely reached the ledge, pulling myself up as the monorail exploded behind me. I then made my way into the nuclear plant. I didn't like it in there. Here's what happened. It was bad enough I lost my ride and had to take the long way, but I immediately hit a roadblock when I ran into a locked red door. I had to double back and look for a keycard. Guess where it was? Around a zombie's neck. The place was crawling with possessed soldiers and imps. Where were these things coming from? I took a detour through a maze of dark, narrow corridors. I had to be quiet. I could hear those things through the walls. I barely made it out of there alive when I found a terminal. Upon reaching it, I attempted to make contact, but couldn't get a signal out anywhere. When I checked a map, the nearest physical computer terminal turned out to be in the toxin refinery, just past the nuclear plant. I'd have to go there for answers. I approached the toxin refinery entrance and heard demonic sounds. I checked the screen nearby for some camera feed. Zombies and imps, and something new. A hunched over pig-like thing, Pinky. I think it could smell me, because it came charging at the door, trying to batter it down. I got my shotgun ready for when it would inevitably burst through, when another Pinky suddenly broke through the wall to my right and attacked. Only this one wasn't even pink. It was see-through, like some kind of specter. That's when the actual Pinky broke through the door. I fought off everything to the best of my ability as the Pinky and Spectre attacked me at once, along with more imps and zombies. This was where the automated process happens that converts the nuclear waste into usable terraforming mulch. I thought I could use them to my advantage, but they seem to have no effect on the demon's skin. However, the barrels still explode, and if I can get their contents into the demon's mouths and wounds, the toxins will do the rest. I could even manage to use refined toxins to cause plants to rapidly grow inside the demons, churning them into a paste. Sorry, getting off topic. Probably sound like a crazy person being so giddy about clever and imaginative ways to kill things. Anyway, I looked through a window where I could see the Phobos labs up ahead, the next step toward my destination. But the area was swarming with demons all over the surface, and I was running low on ammo at this point. So, I made my way underground, where a computer terminal awaited me. Finally, some answers. I still couldn't send a distress signal. Everything was too damaged. However, I was able to take a look at the security footage. Corridors of death everywhere. After flipping through a few cameras, I landed on a live feed of the military base on Phobos, where there had already been an utter massacre. Quickly, I rewound the footage for some closure to finally witness what happened. I observed the footage. Colonel Phobos and his space marines came into the military base, firing away at those monstrosities. They were being surrounded and overwhelmed. I watched as many good soldiers died right then and there. Roland Trogg, Warren Apisa, Taradina Casat, Melanie Butch-Buselli, Chanela Sabando. One by one, they fell. Some died. They were the lucky ones. Anyone who had their hearts touched got their bodies possessed. They were just like me. I could see their souls being ripped out of them. Once they were removed, rainbow souls went up, crimson souls went down. The implications of this were mortifying. In the footage at least, Colonel Phobos was still alive. He was clearing away openings with the BFG 9000 like a walking nuke. However, it was not to last. I could see something grab him. Two somethings. They were huge. They emerged from the shadows, disarmed him, and forcefully dragged him away. The remaining Marines didn't stand a chance after that. They were either dead or possessed. Anything that walked soon after began to scatter and disperse. And here I thought I was about to get closure. Instead, I was just left with more questions. This was bigger than just me and a distress signal. However, those things took Phobos alive. They needed him for something. If there was any chance he was still alive, I was gonna bring him back. I removed the portable distress beacon attached to the terminal and equipped it to my belt. If there was any chance left of sending that signal, I'd have to find Phobos, and we'd make a break for the nearest escape pod and return to Earth. Together. Command control was such a fun detour. Right off the bat was a real good news, bad news moment. The bad news was that some of the old nasties had the high ground with some windows above me. The good news was that they had some explosive barrel neighbors. There was also this room within a room. There was a blue key card and a chain gun. Thought I could just scoop them up and be on my merry way. Nope. The doors shut around me. The area went dark, and a ton of imps rained down, dropping from the ceiling. Lots of spinning was involved. I almost died in there. Never doing that again. These things sure love their ambushes. When I got to this one elevated area, they hit hard, tearing the walls down. Imps and zombies were gunning for me, while a pinky charged at my position. I needed some cover, so I grabbed that pinky by the tooth, shot it off with my sidearm, and used it to keep the creature's jaw propped open, while I blasted my shotgun through its hide and used its carcass as cover. That was a close call. By the time I reached the Phobos labs, it was pretty much smooth sailing from then on out. After finding a yellow keycard, I only got ambushed once, when I was poking around in the lower levels. On the way out, it was so dark I could only see from the light of my shotgun. I needed to get out of there fast. Once in central processing, I knew what it meant to see a tantalizing keycard on the floor. You could probably guess what happened next. Yep, bingo! Once inside the computer station, I gave him a nice little reboot. Holoscreens were working again. I could finally access an entire monitor out of hard light with just a swish the wrist again. Yeah! According to it, my destination was just ahead of an unfinished construction site. Good thing they still had one of those demolition rocket launchers lying around. Should have seen the look on this one imp's face when I blew it sky high on my way out. Phobos anomaly. Finally, I had reached my destination. This was definitely the right place for being the most wrong place imaginable. I saw a wall melt in front of me, revealing a stampede of those pink things. One rocket launch later, I traversed down a demented corridor where UAC execs had been sacrificed in some sort of satanic-looking rituals. In no time at all, there it stood. The Slipgate. I made it. However, once I moved closer, I heard someone crawl out of a little hiding spot off to the side near an imp's carcass. It was Buddy Dakota, clutching a gun with one hand and his grip on an open wound to grab my leg in the other.
No! Don't do it! Whatever you do, don't go in there! Please!
Too late. There was a thud in the distance. And another. Footsteps. Something big was coming, and it was coming for us, getting closer and closer. Just then, a large Baphomet-looking demon emerged from the Slipgate.
It's him! He's real! The devil has come to kill us all!
That's when a second one stepped out of the portal.
Oh, crap.
These things were the ones who took Phobos. I'm sure of it. I'm not sure how they did it, but these two big bruisers instantly summoned forth a horde of 10 specters and sicked them on us. I tried to ward them off with my minigun. However, there were too many, and while most of them fell, one managed to get right in my face and grab hold of my weapon with its jaws and clamped it down into scrap. While I managed to impale the specter with one of its own broken teeth, another swerved behind me and went for Buddy. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was going to eat him, but no. It bit down hard on Buddy and pried his soul out of his body. Before I could stop it, the specter already bolted for the Slipgate, dragging Buddy's screaming spirit through the portal with him. He was gone. The two Bruiser brothers came for me next. Before I knew it, they already started knocking me around, nearly severing me in half. They were a solid team. One was calculating, while the other was ballistic. Fortunately, I'm the man who can do both. I pulled out my launcher and gave him a little rocket jump, and that blew right up in their faces. I fired a few more rounds square in their chests. They countered by hurling a series of massive green fireballs at me. Sometimes they'd try to punch my rockets, with limited success. I could see their bones. Now I just needed their guts. Finally, after some heavy damage, they stood before me, battered and bruised. But these Bruiser brothers had an ace up their sleeve. As though slaying me were their rite of passage, they dug their claws into each other's flesh, which caused a large implosion. Within seconds, there was a black hole in the middle of the chamber where they once stood, pulling all manner of the surrounding tech inside it, and nearly myself as well. When it came to a stop, what stood before me, I can only describe as a two-headed, two-torsoed, four-armed cyborg centaur monstrosity decked out in UAC technology. They seemed to enjoy it. I don't think any human managed to push them this far. Finally, they had an opponent they could go all out against. Lucky me. I opened fire. Lots of fire. A hail of rockets. Didn't do me much good. They managed to catch every single one and hurl them back at me, alongside more of their own green fireballs for good measure. Basically, I ended up blowing up my own rocket launcher. I tried my shotgun. It was stupid to even try. Every shot I fired, they just seemed to catch in their hands and grind into dust, marching closer and closer to me with every blast. Then they started spinning. No joke, their torsos spun round and round, independently from their legs, while all four of their fists released a flurry of punches that felt like they broke something in every hit. They had me cornered. No way around. No way over. The only way out is through, right? So I power slid underneath them. If you do the math, 4 legs means 2 crotches, double the weak spots. I shot them both. That brought them to their knees. Victory was within reach. So anyway, since I was right behind their behind, I jammed my shotgun so far up its butt, any Marine who pulled it out would be ranked King Arthur. I unloaded every shell I had left into that bruiser, ripping and tearing its guts into oblivion, bringing it to the floor with its crippling internal bleeding. I jumped off the end of the gun and crushed both skulls of the Bruiser brothers beneath my boots, finishing them off. I thought about taking my shotgun back, but I wasn't ready to handle the responsibility of being a king. At long last, I stood before the slip gate. It was still active. Connecting to what, I wasn't sure. But it was my only way out of here. Left with only my pistol, I stepped through the portal. A legion of imps and zombies were waiting for me on the other side and jumped me. However, before any of us could do much of anything, the floor gave way and we all fell. Next thing I knew, I was waking up. Everything around me was dead. My armor saved me from the fall. Lucky green, I guess. Where did the slipgate just take me? I looked around the area. It seemed familiar, and that's when I saw a scratched up label reading Deimos. But that's impossible. Deimos vanished. We all saw it. If I'm here on Deimos, then where is here? I need answers. It stinks like rotten meat, but the only way out is through. Want to know how it ends? Yeah. So do I.